my name's Cetus, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain, and welcome back to Warframe. Now, today I want to talk about something a lot more speculative, a lot less kind of just delving into the lore in the game, and more kind of putting together an idea based on what we've been talking about recently, which has mostly been Cetus and the Plains of Eidolon, as well as a couple of other things. So, the thing that I want to do today is I want to suggest what the Unum and the tower that the Unum resides within actually are. And there are a few things that I kind of want to go over. But the first thing is that I want to say is just that everything that we're going to be looking at is going to be in some way related to what's in the game, or that has kind of gone into it being in the game. And so there's a couple of things that are kind of tangential that I will be touching on later, but otherwise everything else is going to be taking a look at some stuff that we've got here. So the first thing I want to take a look at is that obviously we know that the tower itself is kind of biological to one extent or another. It's not entirely tech, and as has been left in the comments by, I believe it's Yokai, I can't remember the numbers after your name, but who pointed out that yes, a lot is mentioned around the Orokin having kind of techno-organic capabilities, and that most of their tech became kind of related to it or based upon it. The first thing that stands out to me is that, firstly, that's not actually what we see a lot of in-game. But in this case, it's something that stands out as being particularly accurate. There's one big thing to take into account, though, and that is that we've seen the inside of structures like this, and we'll get onto that a little more in a little bit. But the first thing that I want to take a look at is the tower itself, because we've obviously got the erosion and the collapse around the tower itself where it's being harvested. But the other thing that stands out to me is that the Unum says that it can offer from itself to sustain the people here. And whilst on one side we can see that it's kind of been wrecked and its damage is being done, over on this side it seems to either be regrowing or at least not as badly damaged. Unfortunately, we can't really jump across all the way out to take a better look at it, but I understand why. But the thing that stands out to me more so than anything else is that it's taking from the bottom, and we've got this mega structure in the middle, which seems to, at the very least, have power running through it. But the external areas of the structure, the parts that are being harvested, are all down the bottom here. They're all on these on just around this ring, and if these are the parts that are being allocated by the Unum to be harvested, then I would imagine that they aren't going to be impacting the structural integrity of the tower all that much. And on top of that, I would imagine that the Unum is probably at the top, as far away from the blasting as possible. Now that might be a fairly obvious thing, maybe, but it's something to take into account. We've got what looks to be a large control tower of some description with a kind of control room at the top, where the rest of the tower is seemingly energy kind of related in terms of that big pylon up the middle, and otherwise it's just structural, which again mostly seems to be on those huge golden pillars rather than on the walls themselves. Now, the next thing is that we see in game that the Unum has a lot of additional computational power, and it has the connection to the quills, and it seems to have the odd relationship with the Sentients to one extent or another, with its temple kuva, its temple blood, having healing properties. Now, the first thing that I'd like to point out is just that these leaves here on these trees seem to be maple leaves. So part of me sat here going, well, this is probably what happens to Ontario, Canada, and this is probably the place where the DE offices still remain, as it were. So if there was ever going to be a place that would count as the center of the Warframe universe, it would probably be here. And so when it comes to this tower and the computational strength that it has, it's a case of considering, why would it be here? And in answering the question of why, with its computational power, its attachment to the Sentients, and also keeping in mind the Sentients' mission, I can only imagine that this is the control tower and the kind of ground control, as it were, for the Sentient mission. In which case, I'm believing that this is the initial Sentient command that would calculate where it needed to go, possible futures for progression, for development, for everything else. And that's why we see Onko down here. Just hop out and go for a run. But that's why we see Onko in here. And when we talk to him, he's all over the place.
Eidolon Seared Swang intercepted at isolated node SAD by Tenosad Park. That first interaction.
And he talks like a robot. Now,
The history you will have.
then on top of it, the thing that he wants is sentient parts. And yet, what would the quills really be wanting those for? Like, what kind of purpose would they have for them? You know, there's most of the tech that they have down here is either fairly rudimentary or is in some way related to the Orokin stuff, which, granted, the Sentients were Orokin tech, but they don't seem to have much else in the way of equipment or anything else kicking around that isn't in some way just stuff, like items that have been picked up. The Sentient side of things, especially considering it's not for Cetus as a whole, because we don't see any real evidence of it outside here, and it's only the quills. Well, the quills are the attendants and adherents to the tower, to the Unum. So I can only assume that those sentient parts are for the Unum's regrowth and upkeep. Which, again, interesting stuff. Now, there's obviously a distinction to be drawn between the Unum and the tower itself. The tower, I believe, is the thing that is sentient. The Unum could be another creature like the Lotus, where it's a sentient that has somehow managed to achieve a more human form, or maybe it's even the prototype for sentience with a more humanistic form or mind. Or the other possibility is that it's like us, a child, a person who was integrated into technology. We were stuck in our sleep pods, and we were attached to the Warframes through the somatic link. What if there's another individual up there who was maybe a Lorist, or another Archimedean of some description, who was then very much in the same way connected to the tower? You know, there's a lot there that would be interesting to see, and I seriously hope that we manage to get up to the top of the tower at some point. But anyway, let's take a look at the other evidence to suggest the tower itself, the structure at any rate, even if the Unum is not. The tower itself is much more biological, and the tower itself could be this kind of core and central sentient that maybe is far more mindless in its design than the other sentients that were unleashed on the rest of the universe. Because again, the Orokin didn't want things to have control of themselves. You know, it was against the various precepts and things to allow it. And so when it comes to when it comes to the Sentients, originally they were they were very upset about, or at least Ballas made a show of being upset about how Perentol's creation could potentially go on to do terrible, terrible things, which of course it did. So that's an interesting thing to talk about another time, maybe Ballas's motivations in those regards. But we can look here at a cross section of this bridge. Now, this bridge has been like this for seemingly quite some time, and it's interesting to note that even though no, it doesn't want to let me get on that way. Okay, that's fine. We'll go around the other way. That even though this has been like this for a good long while, we've still got the cavities in the bone, and we've still got the... I want to take a look at the gooey stuff. There we go. Okay, and here we've not got, we've got the bone that's kind of calcified, but in the center, even though this has seemingly been like this for a good long while, we've still got that gooey center. Now, looking past it, you've got some stuff over there that looks more calcified. If we look around here, it looks more calcified too. However, none of it's all still pockmarked, and it's all still highlighted by the fact that it was biological. It's a bone with marrow in the middle of it. It's meaty. And so where is the one other place that we can see Orokin structures that have been around for a long time? Because this structure is going to have predated the Warframes, predated the Sentients being sent out into the system, and so on and so forth. So it's or at the very least been created at the same time as the Sentients that were unleashed out into the darkness of space. And so where else do we know existed prior to this? And that would be the moon. And thanks to relatively recent events, we can now go and actually take a look at the structures on the moon. Okay, so we're kind of lucky with the place that we've spawned in here, because we've got a good look straight away at... I mean, that just dropped straight off for us, and that's great. Now, the first other thing to note is that this place was up until its removal from normal space, was for the longest time the seat of Orokin power, and this is an older structure, but it predates everything that we've seen prior. But
if they scan you, sentient fighters won't be far behind.
That's fine. We're not going much further into this place. I just wanted to look at the architecture. But again, here we've still got an atmosphere. We've got less water, I'll give you that. But again, we've got a completely different material that is far more stone-like and has this very thin kind of layer of almost white enamel, I guess, on the outside, compared to the thick layer of bone that surrounds the outside of the rest of the Unum as a tower. So we've got two very different kind of ways that these structures have been built and designed. And again, the Unum was the only tower, the only place to be able to hold off the Sentients when they came. Oh god, here comes an oculist. I don't want your attention. I just wanted to look at the buildings. Please leave me alone. Why are you making a beeline for me? I mean, that's just not nice. Anyway, let's leave before we get company. We've got technological, a techno-organic tower that seems to have properties that the Sentients have in terms of its regeneration, adaptation, the fact that it can heal Sentients in a kind of blood transfusion kind of way. Temple Kuva basically also being referred to as Temple Blood. But there is still the point of going, well, yeah, okay, so maybe the moon is so old that technology that was used was different, and so on and so forth, and that might be the same for a lot of places on Earth. But a lot of other tech the Orokin have was suggested to be very much in line with being highly techno-organic. And so the best place to take a look at this and see whether or not that's entirely accurate is the Foundry, because obviously the Warframes, we've got neurodes, we've got plastids, they're both biological materials. We've got plastids and things in the Boar, we've got neurodes in the Boltor. So yeah, there are elements in certain places of having more biological components in some of the weapons and things as well. But then you look at certain other parts, certain other weapons, and you know we've got instruments of destruction that are ultimately completely devoid of these biological parts. Not many, I'll grant you that, and most of them are melee weapons, which again you wouldn't necessarily expect to have a melee weapon with a huge amount of additional material in. Again, nanospores in a knife is an interesting thing to contemplate. But again, you've got this kind of mix of elements between, yeah, there are biological components in some of these, but not in absolutely everything. For instance, I realise that this is the Gorgon, a Grineer weapon, very much more mechanical. But also, I don't understand entirely why neural sensors are part of the heat sword. Temperature regulation, maybe. But again, these are the things that we can observe in game, and in a lot of instances, it's a case of, yeah, we've got some various bits and pieces and probably the majority, to be fair, that have a large amount of biological materials. But then again, look at this one, the Pandero from back in Octavia's early days, considering it's her signature pistol, and yet not a single biological component to it at all. You know, it's whilst yes, they were very biologically or techno-organically kind of focused in a lot of ways, it wasn't the be-all end-all. There were still things that they missed out on, and early architecture at the very least seems to be one of those things. Now, the next thing I want to do is just take a look at some stuff that's a little more outside the game. So the next thing I want to take a look at is some of the concept art that went into the creation of Cetus and some of the other things that artist has done. So I went onto the DeviantArt page for the concept artist that did the main concept for Cetus and for the tower, and I pulled some of the images from there to see what we could see. Now, the first one is that of Cetus as a tower entirely, and the thing that's kind of interesting to me about this image as it stands is that we've got not only the damage on the tower and so on, but we get a bit of a better look at what's going on overall in regards to the full structure, because we can only see one side of it from where we are on the bank of Cetus to begin with, and also we get to see how deep underground this thing actually extends. So really and truly, the amount of stuff that's being pulled away from could be quite minimalist. It could be that the entire top half of the tower is a kind of sending array, communication array, and the Unum herself is actually deep underground. Also realised that with the 1,000-year fish and some of the places that Mercer and so on kind of went and recovered things, it was from under the sea, which is where seemingly that tower extends quite substantially. So again, it's an interesting set of things just to note in terms of the structure. And again, up at the top, there is some damage. There is a side of it that is missing, but again, looking at it in game and even looking at it here, it doesn't look like that's been blown away necessarily. That could very well have been damage from elsewhere, or something else is going on there. Who knows? Which is why I didn't add that into what I was saying earlier. But in regards to the structure, we now know that from this, we can add to it that possibly the top half of the structure is being damaged and eaten away, and why the Unum is fine with that, because potentially the Unum isn't at the top, it's below the surface, which again would also be very interesting to find out. Now, the second image is this one of the bridge that we were looking at a moment ago, and we can see the kind of different levels of it. Now, one of the interesting things here that's hard to see if really noticeable at all on the structures in game is these drainage holes, which again could possibly be from the ostrons drilling in to allow it to drain the fluid before they start trying to use it, or otherwise kind of pull it to pieces. But also it seems to be that these pieces of bridge were maybe destroyed and just forgotten about. And so we've got the bony exterior, we've got the various kind of superstructure of it, as well as the very thick bony outer layer instead of the very thin layer otherwise, and right down to the bottom of the structure there, at the very bottom of the base of it, we've got the kind of slow deterioration there. So at the bottom of the bridge, it says it's marked there as gangreenish bruising. We've got barnacles attaching themselves to the bottom, and we've got those drainage holes, all of which to me again suggest that this biological entity is very much different from the other kinds of architecture that we've seen in the game that the Orokin were using. Now, then the next thing is that I want to go into in regards to the art is actually something tangential that seems to me to connect in rather nicely with the idea that we're talking about here, but which I'll get onto in a minute, because the last thing that I want to talk about in regards to these other elements is how a control station like this that would potentially consider possible futures be able to integrate with others and even potentially retain that regenerative capacity so that it could last through all the ages would be incredibly important to a mission like the mission that they send the Sentients on initially when they're first conceived. So initially they are these self-replicating drones that fly out into the darkness of space, find whatever they need to survive in terms of resources. They adapt to whatever it is that's out there, and they're all traveling at kind of sublight speeds. If the equivalent of like a hyperdrive or like faster than light travel in the Warframe universe is traveling through the void, kind of an almost ever-present subspace wormhole-esque kind of environment for them to travel through, then the Sentients just can't travel through it. So they're going to be traveling, they're going to be flying across space for a very long time, even if they're traveling at the highest speeds that the Orokin can otherwise offer. They're not going to be traveling anywhere near the speed of light, really. And as a result, it's going to take a long time. Hence, you need a control tower that's going to be able to last for a long time. It's going to be able to calculate all those possible futures of where those drones are going to get to, how long it's going to take them to do those things, and so on and so forth. Whether or not it's more a monitoring station than a control tower, who knows? We'll hopefully find that out at some point in the future. But going outside of the origin system, we've talked about, or we've seen in some of the various entries from Samaris, for instance, some of the imprints, that going through the punch from one system to the other, jumping through the void, didn't take a very long time. So the void can cover huge distances very, very quickly. With regard to the Sentients, though, they would have had to travel for a long, long time. And there would be so many variables, so many other hazards, so many pieces of information they need to take on board to actually get where they were going. And that's not even to consider the resources involved. So having a tower that very much seems to be the center of the universe from Earth at any rate, it stands to kind of reason that it's there, especially if it is seemingly sentient in its origins. Because it's not necessarily sentient in design, but then again, the Sentients weren't even sentient in design. The Sentients were Orokin in design. And so it all kind of adds up to this slow progression in what we're seeing in game, and hopefully this will be spelled out a little more maybe through the sacrifice quest, considering that we've also got Umbra coming at some point. We've got Ballast back, so hopefully he'll be able to give us either some more information about various things or not. I'm hoping that we get the two next, Hydroid Prime and the Zephyr Prime, I think, trailers, so that we can actually hear what Ballast has to say about them. And so we can pick those apart as well. But then I want to lead us on to this last thing, and that is this particular piece of concept art from the same individual. Now, this so far is an interesting and odd one, because it's this huge flower-like almost structure that definitely has elements of Orokin growth to it, but it's on a very strange alien surface. There is a little rover down there with a couple of people stood next to it, and we have seen that some of the rover designs do maybe kind of correlate to that in being quite square and blocky, but again, who knows. But considering most of the other work on the DeviantArt page for this particular individual has been Warframe related, at least up until some of the more recent posts on there, this stands to me to be included in that, especially considering some of the similarities in design and so on and so forth between the kind of gold edging to this structure. Now, the more interesting thing that comes out of it is the comment that is going along with it that I've just displayed at the bottom of the screen, but I know it's quite small, so I'm going to just have a quick read of this for you, which says, "Done for a friend who wanted a concept to model off," which, again, this being modelled in some way is interesting to think about. And he described it as a giant sentient flower parasite that crashes onto planets, mines them for their resources until it can spew spores back out into space to continue to spread. Now, this seems to me to be a way that the Sentients would probably quite happily develop, and we know that the Sentients were going places to establish colonies for the Orokin, places that they could travel to and set up. So if this planet wasn't necessarily a planet that they could use, then it would make sense, though, that the structures would still follow a kind of layout that would make sense, and probably an aesthetic that would make sense to an Orokin. But also, this is a fairly elegant and interesting way of continuing to spread through space. They were traveling at sublight, so they would have to at times find additional resources to reproduce, re-establish and recuperate in terms of their numbers if they had gone through some kind of environmental hazard that they hadn't been able to adapt to that quickly. And so as a result, having this mining and then kind of relaunching system is a really interesting and cool one, and it's kind of follows with the sentient MO as we understand it. The fact that also it is mentioned to be a sentient flower parasite is an interesting choice of words. But again, looking at the way that this structure is formed and the way that it looks aesthetically, it's not a huge leap to then think that maybe a sentient planted on Earth would follow the same kind of aesthetic that these sentients are following far outside of the solar system. So, some interesting things to consider, guys. As said, I'm not necessarily saying I'm correct. I kind of hope that we actually see some more of this and find out more about this as things go on. But lots of people have just, at the very least, that I've watched on YouTube or that I've been talking to in regards to the game, all seem to bypass this point. It's just this big biological tower, and the Orokin had all kinds of biotech stuff. So yeah, sure, why wouldn't it be? But to me, there seems to be these huge sweeping differences and big indicators of what the tower is. The blood transfusion to a sentient, allowing it to heal itself from the damage done in the void, especially standing out as one of those big factors. And so as a result, this is my thoughts collected, as it were. I'd love to hear your thoughts, guys. Please leave them down in the comments. I'd love to have a discussion about this. This is very much a fun thing to talk about, in my opinion. But otherwise, guys, thank you very much for watching. and I will see you in the video tomorrow. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, found it interesting, please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Take care.